All right. It's already been an intense day. You notice that? It's supposed to be Dead Week. It's anything but dead. All right. As you notice, I definitely try and support the readings, but I depart significantly from them, often based on what people bring me the day before or even in the last hour before. So, in terms of treatment planning, this is coming from my particular bias in my particular practice, where I basically tell people I have an agenda and it's this. I turn clients into practitioners. Since a lot of people go through all the things that they go through and want to do that work anyway, you might as well just say, okay, this is what you're going to do up front. You're going to basically have to walk people through this exact same process, except with science. In addition to whatever you may learn in the program, if you're in the program. So it comes down to often one basic question if you're going to look at that. So, for example, your mission. So, Mourning Dove, who, even though she's Salish, the person depicted here, Juan Caballero in Spanish or John Horse in English, was a Seminole military leader, basically, who Seminoles were escaped slaves who are mixed with Indians, a particular Indian nation, and went back and forth from slave states into the free states, particularly in Mexico, Texas, and crossing back and forth, freeing people. So everything on the earth has a purpose. Every disease an herb to cure it, and every person a mission. This is the Indian theory of existence. So this is the indigenous belief system in terms of looking at everyone has a life mission. But they often aren't taught about that or even taught to think in those terms at all. And so a lot of times it takes hitting, as to use the program term, hitting a bottom to get it. And in treatment, what happens is we often don't give this to them. And so when Rasmussen and others talk about treatment intensities, like, okay, what was I looking for in the patterns of recovering from how I was abused and how I abused others? What was I looking for? So part of that mission, and one of the things that we often have to deal with, certainly within our own framework, so if native healing begins with the emotional life and answering the question, what's your mission in life, then since we tend to often think in binaries, those of us who, English is the language that we are taught, and English is set up to think in binaries, come to this question depicted here at the bottom: what is your relationship to death? People die in our business. People die as a natural consequence of the things that they're doing. People flirt with death in how they use. While cutting isn't necessarily a suicide attempt, people can look at it that way. If all our alcohol problems come from an overdose, and we would basically treat somebody eating a bottle of aspirin as a suicide attempt, but we don't treat the people who drink fifths of vodka or cases of beer the same way we would treat other people who were clearly suicidal, or shooting up, a gram or more of junk a day, heroin, or on the crack pipe, or going on meth runs. We don't see that as extended suicide, or a person in need of a life mission. So who gives that purpose to people? We often have them. And they're looking for a purpose. And purpose is not, if it isn't given by the family, if it isn't given by your religious framework, who gives it to them? So we're often dealing with people who are dealing with various types of death. So your relationship to death. So if our business deals with death, people die physically and die also in non-physical ways too. Okay? Some people, certainly in the throes of their addiction could be like real life zombies. I don't believe in zombies, but, The Walking Dead, literally. So, question comes back for the practitioner, especially within a treatment context. What is your relationship to death? As a subject, that definitely gets people's attention because it's taboo. And with addiction, we're often dealing with taboo subjects. I'm sorry, I have to get into your personal life. Okay? Your emotional life. Your sexuality, because of, the issue of AIDS. I also have to deal with your relationship with death. How do you grieve? How do you look at different types of death? Okay? And what is your relationship? So, what do you think about, part of being an adult is looking at you understand that you will die. And there's a site called getyourshittogether.com that has, it's great. It has because people don't look at this stuff. Having a will. You have property. You have your life insurance together. Do you have, what if you're incapacitated? Do you have a living directive, advance, directives, when to pull the plug, et cetera, et cetera. And it's adult to actually pay attention to that stuff and have that stuff in advance together, have it together. Particularly if you're a parent, particularly if you have kids, et cetera. What to do so that they don't have to deal with it. So that your stuff doesn't go to the state, right? But then, what is your relationship to the death of others? So I've had clients die in 40 years, sure. So far, knock on wood, I have never lost anybody that came to me for a suicide call. But people do. Right? And the one thing that we can't control in treatment is whether people use or not. Because it comes down to, will they use or not? And how long that not lasts. So, what is your relationship to the death of potential? For example, as when a child or a loved one dies, or if you have a disabling condition, or if you have a special needs child, things like that. These are all forms of death too. Something dies in you. So, how do you grieve? How do you support others in grief, in the grieving process? Now, this was actually, I actually went through with somebody with this in the last, who was looking at the impending death of a relative that they would not be allowed to grieve. And they had to support somebody else in that. So, here, 3 things, which weren't just 3 questions. It was themes around, first, death, your own death, and then, how do you grieve? The answer was, I don't grieve. I haven't grieved. I've had several things to grieve, and I haven't grieved them. Okay, that would be a great place to start in your recovery of 3 months. Because that's a major trigger, particularly if your coping skill with very powerful emotions has been drowning them, which is basically part of the American way. It's a form of denial, going through the stages of grief, knowing what those stages of grief are. So how do you grieve? How do you support others in grief? And how do you express gratitude? How do you express joy? The reason that these questions come up within the 3rd framework How are you expressing joy and gratitude in the service of life? So, for example, death teaches you that there are no ordinary moments. None. How are you paying the rent? That's the Muhammad Ali quote. Basically, service to others is the rent that you pay in life for having a body. How are you paying rent? So, of course, you have to do good self-care. Understanding how you grieve in the presence of death in a business where you're dealing with people that die, that eventually may die on you. That's also been one of the frustrations. Certainly have dealt with people. I've never lost anybody that came to me in a suicide call, but people have been killed by drunk drivers. Had powerful, the only way I can say them is, treatment Jedi who came to us with fourth grade education, very streetwise, very powerful, who got killed by drunk drivers. Students in this class who became very powerful got killed by drunk drivers. Death is part of our business. We might be killed by the very people we're trying to serve. Still want to do it? Good. Well, I'm answering for you. Still want to do it. All right? So there are no ordinary moments. How are you paying the rent in service to life?
That's really true. I worked in dialysis for several years, and that was a really hard thing for me to adjust to because I wasn't used to in the health field. I've been in the health field all my life, but when you're actually physically in their complete life, because you see them for so long, you see them the majority of their time, because they're on the machine, they're family, they're da-da-da-da. So when they go, it's kind of like a part of you.
Yeah.
And so that was a really hard adjustment for me to put between a job and my own life.
Yeah. Yes. How do you have appropriate boundaries? How do you let them go? How do you honor them? There are various ways of doing that even talking about this much obviously isn't part of the book. But, I thought after reading the book, years ago, okay, why aren't they talking about this? Oh, I know. It's America. We embalm and preserve people as if, they just look like they're sleeping. Oh, yeah. No. That isn't healthy. So, emotional equations, we've seen this, right? So I want to not only reiterate that. So, anger plus expression is health. So talking it out, that is expressing it, writing it out, display it as art. Anger is an expression of hurt. Grief has an element of anger in it. So create something in response, if only an inner sanctuary. And also, if only a community of those who can see your pain and help you heal it and keep you honest. So when 12-step groups, your home group or whatever works best, it works best doing this. Community of people who are fellow sufferers who've gone through what you've gone through and can walk you through it in a particular framework. All right? How does your relationship with yourself create healing? Particularly in the context of death, though I don't need to harp on that. I'm just saying that's one of the things you have to be able to express, not only gratitude that you're alive, whether you feel it in the moment or not, but how does the fact that today may be your last day, guide your actions? Is this the way that you want to go out? It's a good day to die is not just Klingon and not just Apache. It's not fatalism. It's like, am I living life to the fullest? now. Not out of fear, but out of joy and gratitude. How does your relationship with yourself create healing, and then how does your relationship with others create healing? All right, so somebody said a really great thing today, inadvertently, which is always the best, so they're channeling, I suppose, to the degree that I believe in that. They made a distinction between because they were this is a rugged white male Oregonian individualist, right? I've gone from being independent, to codependent, to interdependent. And I suggested that he write. Hey, a bunch of people told me that. Yeah, you should write this stuff down. Where do you think these inspiration books come from? People who haven't had stuff done to them? So from a native point of view, codependency reinforces illness and weakness. To reinforce strength and resiliency is interdependency, because it keeps people, you have to both be strong, and that strength is reinforcing. Sometimes the same outward action can be done in both sides. Okay, but reinforcing strength and resiliency is interdependency. Reinforcing illness and weakness in one or both is codependency. This is what happens in addiction. Duwamish elder Harold Belmont, the longest journey you will ever make is from your head to your heart. This native healing ways start with seeing the emotions, and what we would refer to in English as emotional literacy. We haven't covered this yet, right? Okay, so in terms of good treatment planning, other than what you're looking at in the ASAM, here's one of the critical details that usually the counselor is scared to, because they haven't made this journey in themselves. If you haven't made it in yourself, you can't take anybody else through it. So it's nice to have a good bullshit detector, but you also have to be able to call yourself on your own, or have somebody that can call it on you, or circumstances. So, all right, so transformation starts with acknowledgement. Do the hard things first, go to the center of the pain or the ucky and look at it. So for example, with a relationship with a couple, it's not 1 + 1. It's n, that is an unknown number, multiplying. So x is the baggage that person has. X is their baggage, past relationships, current kids, past pain from past relationship, abuse. And within relationship addiction, why are you in it? So that a relationship could look like 1x, that's the hidden baggage that you hide in your look good. The y is, why are you seeking a relationship? If you are seeking a relationship, are you on a rebound? Can't stand loneliness. So you're using, instead of a drug, you're using a person. And are both of you doing that? Because your X's and Y's get together and they multiply. Create chaos within the relationship, which can be then a whole trip in itself.
So does that correlate with the theories of relationship as far as secure and attachment theories?
Yes, when they talk about attachment, how do people attach? How and why do they attach? And how do they detach? And also within the relationship, what do you detach from? Can you make attachments to the strength?
Or are you attaching to the weakness?
Right. All right, so you start with healing yourself first, then work on your interdependency. So with basic emotional literacy, this came from one of the it was called Basic Counseling Skills when the state was running these things, and essentially starting with a basic vocabulary of emotions: joy, happiness, euphoria, ecstasy, excitement, fear, anger, hurt, guilt, depression. So, for example, you could think of them mathematically. Like if you had a named, you feel a particular state, emotional state, and it becomes sort of like a memory address, and you can basically connect all the times that you felt that particular emotion, and then connect it with places in your body, just like the negative ones, the positive ones, right? So joy plus happiness equals satisfaction and contentment. Anger, there's an element of hurt, but a lot of people don't like feeling hurt because it makes them feel vulnerable. They don't like feeling vulnerable, so they cover that up with pain and anger. So along with the hurt comes pain. Don't like feeling vulnerable, so you cover up with an explosive emotion so that you puff up when you're threatened. Peacock display. Peacocks, actually, male peacocks, not just attracting mates, they actually puff themselves up, make that display when they feel threatened by you. So anger wants to explode out, but it can't. But if it can't explode out, it turns inward, and this is where a lot of cutting behavior comes from. Turn the pain inward into something you can control. You can't control the abuser. Can't stop the abuse by communicating, so you turn it in on yourself. That itself, then, you feel a loss, you feel anger, so then you'll get sadness, grief, guilt, and hurt. So when we look at the things, especially with a relationship with death, part of the grieving process is being angry. That five-step model that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross basically developed back in, I think it's more like the 70s and 80s. Denial, anger, eventually to acceptance. All right, so in a native construct, you can think of them as shape-shifting. They're shape-shifting animals, the emotions are, that you're hunting in the landscape of your being. I do have a poetic license, so I can say this kind of stuff. So inside yourself, these things shape-shift, and you're tracking them. So in that construct, which I'll be sharing with you shortly, assuming the PC will display that particular image, the river of anger is a Navajo construct. So in Navajo way, anger is a holy force because it leads you to healing. So the river of anger in Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, where this is, there's a river here that started out at the surface and cut its way down. And depending on rain, for example, you can see clouds on the distant horizon. Having driven through that terrain, I know that a distant rainstorm can create a flash flood hundreds of miles away. So the river can go up or down. So if it's low, you have low intensity anger, but sometimes it's overwhelming. Look at that image of overwhelming. It's a raging river. can go up and down. And some people, for example, in combat, you are trained to go from 0 to total rage instantly, like that. And so part of the readjustment for a lot of combat vets is to come back and not have that hair trigger anger or going into rage mode. So crossing the river of anger. So it's another cultural tool. Shout out to Arlie Naskai, who is Navajo or Diné. So the river of anger. So tracking emotions. Emotions are kind of like a powerful being that can shapeshift or change form. They leave tracks, but the tracks change. And so especially in complex emotions, you have to track that. If you're feeling grief, that there is an element of anger in there. There is an element of loss, hurt. There also might be shame as part of the grief. Why didn't I treat them better? Right? So you have to track all the emotions as they change. Or be able to track one emotion and track it back to anger or something like that. Right? You can also sense, smell, hear, feel, or smell them. And other senses, too. Now, we're used to thinking of the 5 physical senses and using the metaphor there. So leaving tracks obviously is using visual, but if it's an emotion, it's inside you. How do you track that? So that's why using the idea of, oh, well, anger can reside in particular parts of your body. So can grief, so can joy, so locate that in your physical being and learn to work them out, okay? Something's fishy. In terms of looking at something doesn't feel quite right, something's fishy, a red herring. So in case you didn't know what that was, red herring is a particular kind of fish that bloodhounds or other things will latch on, and that will obscure the scent of the real prey. So that's where they use that, a red herring. Okay, something's not adding up. Another metaphor. So in this framework, the river of anger, anger is a combination of sadness and fear. Okay, so on one side you have words for sadness, and on the other you have words for fear. So anger within this framework is always an indicator of hurt or wounding. Okay? And usually what happens, part of the change is if you've been hurt by somebody, you can't be the one who was wounded, so it's easier to be angry. So you don't feel as vulnerable. But vulnerability is something that you have to look at in terms of, okay, I feel a loss of strength. All right, so you have different intensities of anger within this construct. So for example, low, irritated, bugged, disturbed, annoyed. Medium, mad, pissed, ticked, disgusted. High level of anger, different high intensity of anger, enraged, furious, hateful, vicious. Okay? So these intensities is how high the river is. You go blind with rage. So within this framework, for example, the twins, have I spoken of Monster Slayer and Born of Water? Okay, so in this framework, there's a whole, what in Western terms we would think of as mythology. There is 2 twins, monster slayer and born of water, or born for water. They are twins of the sun and changing woman, who's the earth. So changing woman basically has the twins, and they grow up not knowing who their father is, and then when they come of age, they are sent to their father for training. So what's happening is that these monsters are eating the people, and the monsters are taking various forms. And as part of the training, their father tells them, the monsters are your relatives. So there's a connection. They're your relatives, but perhaps that is no more. Meaning, the monsters have been blinded by their anger to the level it's rage. And so they do things that are unspeakable. They consume or hurt the people. So you need those. So part of the toolkit that the son gives his warrior son. So the monster slayer got black armor of black obsidian, and born of water has armor made of turquoise. So the warrior and the healer. Right? So warriors have a relationship with death. Have to face their death. Monster slayer, in order to basically face the monster, often has to be eaten by the monster, while his brother remains outside with 2 prayer sticks, that is, 2 sage smudge sticks that he plants in the ground in his mother. And if his brother is about to die, the smudge sticks light themselves up. He starts praying and then is instantly transported alongside his brother in the heart of the monster. Now, what's happened then is you need the warrior to approach the thing that you fear. Okay, that's why I say go to the center of go to the place you are afraid to approach. You need the heart of the warrior to be able to do that, even if it might mean your death or the death of what you think you are. So the idea is the monster is eaten, monster slayer. So the warrior has made the penetration into the heart of the monster. They can see and be in the center of that rage. The healer appears and can see the way out because the monster is blind with rage. Literally, consumed with anger that it can't see the way out. So in these stories, they trick the monster into doing something and the monster is slain, but often what happens when the monster is slain is they turn into a natural feature of the desert, like a river or a mountain. So for example, Shiprock in Navajo country is where bird god and bird god's mate lived. When Monster Slayer went up against them and they were slain, the 2 nestlings that were in the nests after the parents were killed are eagle and owl, seeing far in the day, seeing far into the darkness. Okay, so something useful. All right? So these intensities, these emotions, how high the river is. The river it's low, it's easier to see the stones to cross. And the stones are different types of emotion. If it's higher, it's harder to see the stones to cross. But if you're going to cross the river, you're going to need some swimming skills. Keeping your head above water, that is, feeling the anger of intensity around you, but not feeling it inside you. Because that's often a skill that we have to develop. We will call it professional detachment, where people will have their grief. They will have their anger. They will have their rage, not necessarily directed at us. Or we will also feel their anger and their rage, not necessarily directed at us, but we still have to see the way out for them and point it out. Okay, so you might have to swim. And that also means you must be able to swim when you can't touch the bottom. As we say, keep your head above water in the storm of emotion or the raging river. because you might have to keep your head above water until you get to some solid ground and be able to walk out. Taking them with you. Oh, great. How nice. The graphic works. All right. So, low, medium, high intensity. Here's the river. Here's you on one side. And there's the other side of where your needs are. So if you think of this as, if you remember, maybe you may not have had psychology, but Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The idea that safety, sense of belonging, purpose, however you conceive of what a need is. So each one of these stones, the technique is this. If anger within this construct is a combination of sadness and fear, pick a situation that made you angry, that causes for a verbal response.
My dad dying.
Okay. So, sadness. So, depressed, first stone. How do you feel about, it's not therapy, right? This is illustration. Because your answer is going to be common. Okay? Did you feel abandoned? No. Did you feel powerless?
Yes.
Okay, boom, next stone.